Tell us, when you lose your student deferment for Vietnam, how did you connect with the Outlaws and the Mystics and end up in Oregon?
Well, I was already connected with the Outlaws and the Mystics when that happened. But
how did you initially connect with them, and how did you end up in Oregon?
Well, my draft status, right after I was 18, I went into college because, you know, that's what you did to have a 2S. And my dad was pretty much against the war, but he was very much a believer that, you know, as part of the draft, you should do your duty. And so he encouraged me to apply for a conscientious objector status, which I did. And but you know, and I went through a long process. I actually studied with some Quaker folks that were helping people go through that process. But when it was all said and done, they turned me down on it. I still had a 2S. I did a semester at Fullerton College, but I was already hanging out with a group of folks that I'd characterize as, you know, outlaws, writers, and mystics. They were living in Laguna Beach, and we had kind of made a decision to move up to the Northwest to try to buy some land up there. It was sort of the, you know, like in the Jackson Browne song, it was sort of like the everyman dream. You know, everybody was leaving town trying to find a place where they could kind of break away from a value system and establish a new value system. That's what was happening at that time. And so I was already kind of hooked up with those people. Moved up to LA and dropped out of Fullerton, moved up to LA and applied at LA City College. I was a late registrant. I went through the process that night, tried to, you know, paid all my fees, and went through. When it was time to pick my classes, because I was a late registrant, about the only thing that was left was second year basket weaving, prerequisite required. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to go turn in my money. I can't do this. And so I dropped out of college, and within a couple months I was classified 1A. Right about that same time, we headed up to Oregon with this group of folks, and had my guitar with me, looking for places to play. All of us were going to look for jobs up there. But there really were no places for me to play my music up there, and music was changing quite a bit at that time, from sort of acoustic folk music into pop music, rock music, that kind of thing. It was becoming way more popular. And so instead of playing my guitar in a coffee house, I found myself working in a lumber mill. You know, it wasn't exactly what I had in mind. And my wife was working in a fishery in Coos Bay with people who had pretty much been working there their whole lives, and their kids worked there, and then their kids worked there. And so there wasn't a lot of future in it, and you know, we could see it wasn't going to work out, and the scene that we were living with, the people we were living with, didn't have a lot of focus. We ran into a lot of hardships. It's way too long of a story to tell, but you know, to try to capture what happened, basically our scene kind of just fell apart. We bounced from house to house. Everywhere we moved, we were the strangers in town, and we had to kind of, you know, get people to warm up to us because they weren't used to seeing kids with long hair. You know, I mean, previous to this time, as most of you probably recall, I'm looking around. You know, I don't know how old you are, but I'm just kind of looking and thinking, well, most of you probably know what I'm talking about. People weren't used to seeing guys with long hair. You know, I mean, I remember when I got my first pair of bell bottoms. Boy, that was a big jump, you know, to wear some pants that went out like that at the bottom. And so there was a lot of changes going on. And my wife and I found ourselves eventually in Portland, Oregon. And at that time was 1969. President Nixon was the president. And they instituted a couple of things during his administration. One was called the no-knock law, which meant that you could, basically the police could enter a dwelling or raid a dwelling without a warrant. I think they've gotten rid of that now. But they also had a thing called secret indictments, which meant that when...
Joe, what happened to the Patriot Act?
Oh, that was way a long time ago.
It sounds like it's part of the no-knock law.
Well, I think that it might have been where they got the idea for some of the Patriot Act. But anyways, they instituted these laws under the Nixon administration. So they were in effect, and we were basically in Portland, part of the youth counterculture. Admittedly, we were smoking marijuana, we were taking LSD, we were doing what kids did then. And but the FBI decided that they would infiltrate the counterculture community of Portland, Oregon, because they wanted to make sure that there weren't some other kind of revolutionary activities going on. There weren't some people building bombs or accumulating guns, because there were a lot of different angles to the revolutionary movement that was happening in the 60s, as you'll recall. And they didn't really find anything like that happening up there. They just found all these people, and a lot of them were breaking laws to a certain extent, and this guy, over a period of 6 or 7 months, accumulated, 350 indictments on people that were just sat in a box. And then when they decided to go out and raid the city, they just went around. This guy more or less got everybody to be at a certain place at a certain time, because nobody was talking to each other. And we were actually at a friend's house listening to the new band album, and on the box was the night they drove old Dixie down when they kicked in the door and arrested us and took us to jail, most of us on trumped up charges. My wife was released a couple days after the arrest, but they had some indictments on me from this guy. And so what they did is she actually went around Portland and got all of our friends together and was able to raise enough money to retain an attorney to get my bail reduced so that I could get out of jail. And so, I recently, on this album, I have a song about it actually called Old Portland Town, which kind of tells a story. I kind of turned it into the love story, because in retrospect...
Maybe you play it after.
I will play it for you, but in retrospect, I thought about, wow, my wife at the time, my girlfriend, she was 19 years old.
She did all this.
It was the dead of winter. Yeah, she got dropped off on the other end of Portland, hitchhiked over to where our car was, had to pop start it because the battery was dead, or the starter didn't work, and was able to get the car and get over to Reed College, where we had some friends, and round up some energy to try to get me out of jail.
Do you ever think that if you went to Vietnam presently, if you ever went to Vietnam back then, you could have come back, you possibly could have came back in a body bag, and you wouldn't have had a beautiful daughter and a beautiful granddaughter?
Well, I thought about that way ahead of time. I mean, I knew I was not going to go fight that war. When I first heard about it, when I had to sign up for the draft, most of us hadn't even heard of Vietnam yet. We didn't know what that was. And we sure didn't know that our country was fighting over there. And all of a sudden it became evident that we'd kind of been there for a while, and this was all going on. I actually had a teacher at that time. His name was Mr. Lau. He was an English teacher. And he was an ex-Navy. He was a Navy veteran. And I expressed to him one time, I remember telling him, man, I'm scared. I don't want to go there. I have no idea what this is about. I have no interest invested in this. I'm not about violence. I'm not about killing people or subjecting myself to the possibility of being killed. And he said, don't worry about it so much. The military's not that bad. He said, you have more chance of getting killed in an accident on the freeway. And I said, well, I'll take my chances. There was no way I was going to go into the military service. And I stood by that, and I stand by it today. I'm not down on the military. It's a choice for some people. And in the middle of the country, sometimes that's the only opportunity for people to be able to take their lives to the next level. But for me, that was never in the cards, and I wasn't going. There was no way I was going. And I stand by it. I'm not ashamed of that. So.